So, we're going to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs, Pat Mahomes, and how all of this, their neurological aspects that I believe is correct, based on actual neuroscientists through TED Talks and stuff, and put a theory together on why they're so different. And we're going to come to talking about some conclusions and stuff, and how this relates to what I've been studying in people that keep reptiles. Stay with me here. So, I knew the Chiefs were going to win months before the Chiefs actually won. It was somewhere in early January, because this is my baby girl Pitch. She's a big old worm. Oh my god, she's like, oh my god, this thing is huge. This is Pitch. Pitch actually was obtained. I got my baby girl. This is my first reptile ever. I got her the day before the Chiefs were supposed to play Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl. I don't understand why that game never happened. So ever since then, the Chiefs have really not done anything in the Super Bowl. It was February 6, 2001. I got this baby girl. She was only about 3 or 4 months old. Now she's a full-grown adult. You know, way different. Look how gorgeous she is. She's so pretty. The deal is, in January, I lost one of my favorite Peter Banded skinks. No Name was her name. She passed away. Oh my God, it devastated me. And I knew then the Chiefs were going to win, because it broke that curse. Because I wasn't going to give up my baby girl, but then I accidentally lose one that's near and dear to my heart, like she is. And so, yeah, I know it. Because I know it's a joke. That's all it is. But I actually knew the Chiefs were going to win because of their psychology during halftime. Every game that you ever watch of the Chiefs now with Mahomes, if they go into halftime down, they play the second half to win. Like, they go balls out. Now, if they go into the second half, 20 more down, then it's a questionable whether they can win or not. But if they go into halftime a little bit up, then they play the second half not to lose. Completely changes the psychology of them. And it changes everything. So it's very fascinating how that works. That's very interesting to me, that just that difference in their psychology is why they look like they play to their opponents, because that's what they're actually doing. So when they're playing a shitty team, they look kind of like a shitty team. They're playing a very healthy team, they look like a very healthy team. She's in mating season, and she's calm fancy set, so she's got this big beard here. So we're going to let her go back in. I love you, baby girl. My baby girl. So now I'm here with my Zabra Skinks. And for everybody that thinks the Chiefs only won because of that one play, are you out of your mind? Seriously. Now, when Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid lost the AFC Championship last year, they both said the same thing. We should have been 3 points better. Now, Jason Kelce, love that guy. What a wonderful man. He said it too. He said we should have been 7 points better. We could have been 7 points better. That's how you really need to be in life. Jason Kelce really is like this one single play. I should have been better. Like, I knew what was happening and I didn't do it. But we're going to get back to that with Mahomes. I think that's part of what makes Mahomes great. But we'll get to that here in a minute. We need to talk about people thinking that the Super Bowl or that the NFL is scripted. In our world, we get addicted to so many things. There's somebody behind the scenes, and that makes us feel like we're in the in. Like we know something nobody else does. Oh my God. And that becomes addictive. Now, we are seeing this more and more that this is the case out there in the world. And we have mass media fueling that, and people aren't being satisfied in the rest of their lives, so they're becoming more and more addicted to this. And this is exactly what it is. So you have a difference between people that actually go, hey, maybe there's something not with this. But then you have people who go, oh, well, no, that's and then you call them on it and you logic and they go, oh, okay. And then there's people that doesn't matter what you say, they will always have that mentality. These are the people who are easily addicted to this stuff. They need therapeutic help. And if your family member is dealing with this, you need to get them mental help from an actual therapist. But this is something that if they continue to do it, then you really have to have that intervention, because this is not healthy. Pat McAfee does a fantastic job on his podcast stuff on this topic and things like this, busting it down. So if you have NFL players that have to reach a certain height to really play well in playoff games, do the refs have to hit that same mark? No. That's why you get shitty refs, because they're not held to the same standard. That makes perfect sense. Oh my God, that's perfection. And that's what's really happening. It's not a cabal. These are people spending their lives dedicated to a game. So let's work on that. Let's try to find something else. Reptiles can be addictive because of how it makes people feel. It gives them that, I'm so happy I've got this in my life. This makes me feel like I own this. I'm part of this. This is really great. And it is. It absolutely is. And that's what those players on the field think too. Jason Kelce, how they actually take it in stride and they actually go through. And Jason mentally goes back over every single play and figures out where he could have personally done something different. This is fantastic. This is probably where most of us should be at in our lives when we want to talk about things as if, oh, well, I could have done this differently. This should have been done differently. There's a lot of things that we can learn from that. But one thing that Patrick Mahomes may be different at is the fact that he may not actually have to live through something to truly experience it. He goes, this is how my life is. I don't have to go through something. I've heard interviews where he talked about spending his childhood practicing. So he literally goes out and practices on his knees throwing the football. This takes some imagination. And we're going to listen to this YouTube video from a neuroscience doctor on TED Talk a little bit. And we're going to go in and discuss what he was talking about. The pathway, when you actually use your imagination and you're seeing it in your head, you're actually using your cerebral cortexes that are in the back of your head. Well, that actually travels. In a thing called blind sight shows us that this information drops off in the brain, but you'll only be able to see it on an MRI if the person has regular eyes but a bad cerebral cortex, because the cerebral cortex is so powerful. Now that has to travel through the brain, and it doesn't travel on the outside. And we'll see where one doctor actually sees the empathy. Empathy is not the modeling part of empathy. So if somebody smiles and you smile, somebody yawns, then you yawns. It's in what people sometimes call the reptile brain. Not a fan of that. Reptiles are way smarter than that kind of bullshit. So, and this is something animals do have. They do empathize with other animals because they have to for survival purposes. The school of fish is being attacked. They all swim together because they know they're actually empathizing in their brains together. That is actually a form of empathy.
So in humans, what we do is we put them in a scanner, we measure their brain activity while we ask them to do certain actions, like taking soup out of a bowl. We can then map all the brain regions that are active when you yourself do something. Then we can as well show you movies of somebody else do similar actions. And we can map now in blue the brain regions active while you see somebody else's action. And then I can show you in white the region that, like the neurons in the monkey, are regions that are part of your motor programming, but that become reactive each time you see somebody else perform a similar action. Now, of course, I started with the boy where the most salient thing were his emotions, and now I'm showing you action. So how about emotions? Well, the tricky thing is that emotions are not easy to study in a lab, because I can put you in a scanner and ask you to be sad for 10 seconds while I'm measuring your brain activity, but it's not going to work very well. So what we ended up doing was putting people in the scanner with an anesthesia mask on their face. Ask you, why do I get an anesthesia mask? But you tell them they'll find out soon enough. And indeed, we then start to puff really unpleasant smells like rotten eggs or rancid butter in them. And that works pretty well. So we had to take one of them out because he started vomiting. But for the other ones, we could now repeatedly measure what parts of the brain were active while the person was feeling an emotion himself. And you see that here in red. Now, we could also show them somebody else going through a similar emotion, map those areas in blue. And again, we saw that basically you recruit your own emotions each time you see the emotions of others. Now, you might wonder, are we all equally empathic? Well, there are differences amongst us here in this room, with some people crying more when they go to the movies, for instance. And what we see is that if you scan people that report being more empathic, these activities are stronger. But we were as well interested in the real extremes of empathy. So we got interested in trying to see what would happen in psychopathic criminals. So one of the ideas is that they lack empathy, and that the reason why they do terrible things to others is because while they hurt someone, they don't empathize with his pain, and that takes away the barrier towards hurting others. So we put people in the scanner and showed them movies in which they could see in the scanner somebody else experiencing pain. So it'd be here somebody getting his hand pinched, pinched again, or then having his finger twisted, or being slammed. Now, when we did that with healthy volunteers, we found very robust activity in all the systems I've been telling you about, in particular here in this emotional part called the insula. When we did the same with the psychopathic criminals, this activity was really much reduced. So that fitted a bit the idea of a broken empathy.
But then that pathway's inside, so it doesn't always contribute here, but sometimes it does. But then that goes to something to do with your imagination here. Your memory and your imagination and everything is pulled from so many sources, but your imagination does lie in the right side of your brain, where your left side is memory retrieval. So we might look at it as a imagination retrieval. And if you want proof of this, try to look straight and try to imagine something. Your eyes will automatically dart to the left. And if you try to remember something, your eyes will dart to the right, because the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body. The right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. So that's actually provable that the retrieval method is at least in that hemisphere, not necessarily the whole thing. But that pathway still travels through it and goes back to the cerebral cortex. Now, when you have like an only child or something like that, there's actually events that can happen in your life as well. And so as this actual pathways develops and gets overused as a child, you can grow it as an adult, but it's never going to be as good as if it's a child. Like, there's steps here. And this is what I believe Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, Einstein, me, I have this. The Ridley Scott, I also believe, has this, because they talk about things in imagination. And you can see in the way people talk about animals in my study that this is an imagination thing. Like, this is something that actually is important for empathy-wise. And so this pathway develops, and it gets overdeveloped. So the myelin in your brain actually sits there and grows to where it creates a pathway that just goes.
This synchronous firing strengthens the connections between that set of neurons, linking them together into what's known as a neuronal ensemble. In this case, the one for pineapple. In neuroscience, this is called the Hebbian principle. Neurons that fire together, wire together. If you try to imagine a pineapple later, the whole ensemble will light up, assembling a complete mental image. Dolphins are encoded by a different neuronal ensemble. In fact, every object that you've seen is encoded by a neuronal ensemble associated with it, the neurons wired together by that synchronized firing. But this principle doesn't explain the infinite number of objects that we can conjure up in our imaginations without ever seeing them. The neuronal ensemble for a dolphin balancing a pineapple doesn't exist. So how come you can imagine it anyway? One hypothesis, called the mental synthesis theory, says that, again, timing is key. If the neuronal ensembles for the dolphin and pineapple are activated at the same time, we can perceive the two separate objects as a single image. But something in your brain has to coordinate that firing. One plausible candidate is the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in all complex cognitive functions. Prefrontal cortex neurons are connected to the posterior cortex by long, spindly cell extensions called neural fibers. The mental synthesis theory proposes that, like a puppeteer pulling the strings, the prefrontal cortex neurons send electrical signals down these neural fibers to multiple ensembles in the posterior cortex. This activates them in unison. If the neuronal ensembles are turned on at the same time, you experience the composite image just as if you'd actually seen it.
Yeah.
This conscious, purposeful synchronization of different neuronal ensembles by the prefrontal cortex is called mental synthesis. In order for mental synthesis to work, signals would have to arrive at both neuronal ensembles at the same time. The problem is that some neurons are much farther away from the prefrontal cortex than others. If the signals travel down both fibers at the same rate, they'd arrive out of sync. You can't change the length of the connections, but your brain, especially as it develops in childhood, does have a way to change the conduction velocity. Neural fibers are wrapped in a fatty substance called myelin. Myelin is an insulator and speeds up the electrical signals zipping down the nerve fiber. Some neural fibers have as many as 100 layers of myelin. Others only have a few. And fibers with thicker layers of myelin can conduct signals 100 times faster or more than those with thinner ones. Some scientists now think that this difference in myelination could be the key to uniform conduction time in the brain, and consequently to our mental synthesis ability.
And I'll have links below on these topics from TED Talks. So the myelin, and it lowers how these interact with other things by insulating them, and it makes it go faster. And this is a developmental thing that happens to some people. And this is something we talk about with Einstein and stuff. And one reason, and I don't know if it always has to go through the empathy part of the brain, because not everybody that has this is going to have a massive same amount of empathy. So it's very fascinating. But we can see Patrick Mahomes talks about seeing the field, and his empathy is off the charts. I imagine that he actually has no choice in to empathize with the people on the field. Like, it doesn't matter. He just empathizes with them. And that helps him understand. There's a quote from Ender's Game that's really good. To truly defeat your enemy, you must first love them. And that's what they're talking about, empathy. You must really empathize. But Patrick Mahomes, because he empathizes so much and he can't get away with it, he can deal with it differently than most people would deal with empathy. Like, it would be a struggle for so many people. Patrick Mahomes might have been able to fight, and it's not because he's a bad dude. It's just because he's dealt with it so much that he's actually probably already saw it in his head at some point in his life and prepared himself for it. Same thing for Andy Reid. They've probably gone over this. Now, we can see that some people don't think Patrick Mahomes is that good. Well, there's some takeaway here. And these are like literally in the studies that I've done. It's so hard to find this. And I've interviewed people that talk about you need to do this for your animals, you need to do this for your reptiles, because it's going to make their lives better. So these are not people that are devoid of empathy and care and love for animals. These are just people. And there's just a handful that can actually use their imagination to empathize with these animals. And that's fascinating how little. I thought it way more, but it's not. It's very rare. Well, the one thing that I found in my life, having a degree in physics and more, people don't know what to do with me in the real world. They're like, we like, you got a physics degree. What do we do with you? Well, anything you do with an engineer. Like, it's pretty insane. So for most people, when Patrick was coming out, they had no idea. They had no idea what to do with it. Andy Reid did. And so these are things that we need to take into account. And if we can figure this out, which is what I'm trying to study, that we might be able to set up new standards, new understandings. Okay, so when you see this might be somebody to actually look into. They won't all be the same. They won't have the same. It takes more than that. But when these people are in the field, because these are not the people that you will see at the top. They are not. And it's hard for people at the top, like Chip Bayless, will never be able to understand Patrick Mahomes. He thinks he does, but he's so basic because he's seen it. He knows what he's looking at. He knows, and he can't get away from that. He has no idea that the neuroscience of somebody else is there. Like, it's just so different for him that he literally just can't fathom somebody being that good. Patrick spent the effort, spent the time. His brain developed in a different way than everybody else's that created this. And now nobody wants to give him the love because they don't know what to do with him. They don't know what to make of it. And that's what we're talking about. That's what I've been trying to study, because you would think people that keep reptiles would be the most unique people ever sometimes. No, the most of them are just as normal as everybody else. I'm not normal, but that's why. If you're not in it, you can't see it. And understanding that is important. And so the most people that have these abilities are not people in the mainstream that are high up, but once they get to those high ups, they stand out. Almost like it's magic. It's so unique and so rare, and so that it's just magical. No, it's neuroscience, buddy. Neuroscience. Like I said, I'll link those in the description. So I hope we can take away some things from this. So the Chiefs if you're not going to get 20 on them, you need to play from behind if you're going to beat them at halftime. We need to stop being so there's a cabal behind everything. And the people that can't get away from that do need to see a therapist. They need help. Then we need to understand that when negative things happen, we need to look at what we can do. Jason Kelce was doing. And it's wonderful. Now, understanding that your imagination and everything connects dots, and myelin can increase there, but it's very rare helps with your imagination, being able to see inside your head, but you don't always get control of that. But also, the frontal lobe is actually your braking system. So when Patrick Mahomes talks about over the last couple of seasons, he's gotten better. I haven't really seen him get that much better. He was always really this good, but to him, because of that frontal lobe, I believe he's thinking that the field and everything around him is just cleared up, and it probably has improved a little bit. And I believe this is what makes Andy Reid, but I don't know Andy Reid's history to fully have some sort of understanding of that. Usually that is things that happen with only children and abuse victims. People that have anger issues that learn to control them as children, things like that. Having anger issues does not increase empathy, but you should see an increase in empathy possibly for the majority of people with disability, because they don't have a choice, because it's as the circuitry goes back to their cerebral cortex and their imagination, it goes through their empathy. So therefore, they're going to empathize with everything. But this also means they're doing it all the time, so they've had to learn to control it. So therefore, empathy isn't going to hold them back. And that doesn't mean they're bad people. They're probably better than they are average. But they're so rare that you just are not going to find them in mainstream. They're not going to be the head of a studio normally. They're not going to be head of much. But when they get there, they're extra special like magic. And that's what I'm looking for in herbiculture. That's the stuff that I want to know. These are the things, and I really thought I would see more, and I haven't so far. But I have an engineer video coming out that I studied. I had an interview with him, and it's fantastic. So hopefully you guys will come along with me and watch some of my videos previously, and I am going back and timestamping everything so that you can just skip to the parts that you think are important. And I hope the majority of you have learned something or have something to take away from this. Share with your friends if you want to. Share this, give it to Patrick Mahomes. And no, I don't encourage Patrick Mahomes to get a snake. Because if Patrick Mahomes gets a snake and it bites his hand and he has to go down for a week, oh my God, they're going to kill me. Like, they'll just murder, the Chiefs Kingdom will murder me. Like, I will not make it a day. But a bearded dragon or an axle, a Eurymastix or a blue-tongued skink would definitely be options that are not necessarily going to hurt, and his 2-year-old will absolutely love them. Just love them and be more willing to accept conservation in the future. I would love to know your thoughts on this. Link them down in the description. Do you think Mahomes has a massive amount of empathy? Do you even care that he has empathy or not? I would love your comments. Love to understand what you're thinking. How could I improve a study on this? I've been asking them to imagine being in the shoes of their animals, and it's been very difficult for them. I think I'm going to keep doing that, but I'm going to add video and ask them to empathize with that animal and put themselves in the shoes. Let's see if that makes a difference, seeing it over just imagining it. And if you're listening, Patrick, or Travis Kelce, or Jason Kelce, respect the hell out of you. Respect you, Andy Reid. Go Chiefs. Been a Chiefs fan since Joe Montana. And by God, I've earned this fucking win. Go Chiefs. So, I love you all. Have a good night.